Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the 2025 State DOT and Subrecipient Reporting webinar. My name is Matt Nalco, and I am joined by Courtney Springer. If you have any questions as we go through our presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. As a disclaimer, the contents of this presentation are intended to provide clarity regarding the existing requirements of the FTA and NTD. Please always feel free to refer to the statutes and regulations for requirements. The goal of this webinar is to identify changes for the upcoming report year and to provide an overview of NTD reporting requirements, as well as how to apply these requirements to the system. Again, this presentation has been created for state DOT reporters and rural general public transit, or RGPT, subrecipients. Here is the agenda for this afternoon. First, I will do a quick overview of the NTD, then move on to important changes and clarifications for the 2025 report year. Next, we will review the fundamentals of NTD reporting, and we will discuss how to get started in the NTD reporting system. Then, Courtney will take over and discuss how to complete the annual report, including some common reporting challenges. Lastly, we will review the validation and closeout process. Here is the contact information for the National Transit Database. If at any point you require technical assistance while completing your report, please reach out to your analyst. If you encounter any technical issues with the system, you may contact the FTA IT Help Desk and/or your analyst. If you need assistance with accessing our published annual data products, please feel free to email our help desk between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Courtney and I's contact information is listed here. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about this presentation. In addition to our contact information, we also want to provide the FTA program contact here, Chelsea Champlin. The key reference documents for NTD reporting are located mostly here. This will include the policy manual, of which an updated copy for report year 2025 is currently available, the glossary, user guide, and the transit asset management guidebooks. First, a quick overview of the National Transit Database. What is the National Transit Database, or NTD? The NTD was established to be the nation's primary source for information and statistics on all public transit modes in the United States. It's a source of data for performance measurement benchmarking, as well as research. Recipients and subrecipients of Chapter 53 funds report to NTD. Subrecipients of State 5311 funds report data through their state's report. These subrecipients may include those that have received funding in the past and are still required to report based on continuing grant requirements, as well as some who report voluntarily and wish to receive Chapter 5311 funds in the future. 5311 recipients and subrecipients are required to report due to their grant requirements, as stated here from the associated legislation. NTD data is due on the following dates: October 31st, January 31st, and April 30th. These are assigned depending on your agency's reported fiscal year end dates. Please note the last date to submit report revisions for your reporting group. After this date, your report will not be sent back for further revisions. We will now go into changes and clarifications for report year 2025 that may affect your report. The first reporting change is that the agency ID field in the P50 form is now required. As a reminder, the P50 form is located in an agency's NTD profile and is where agencies submit their General Public Transit Specifications, or GTFS. The agency ID field was previously optional, but must be completed starting in report year 2025. The first new requirement is the addition of the agency ID form field in the P50 form. The agency ID is in the GTFS feeds agency text, fare attributes text, and routes text files. The unique agency ID number is used to identify a transit agency or specific mode. If you hover next to the agency ID column name, the tooltip provides a description on how this field is recorded. If your agency does not have an agency ID field in the previously mentioned text fields, then you should use a unique number that identifies your agency, such as your agency's 5-digit NTD ID. The next reporting clarification is that the shapes field text will be required in report year 2026 for rural reporters. The shapes text file is optional in report year 2023 and 2024, and is still optional for the current 2025 report year. The purpose of this file is to include the path that the vehicles travel and how the transit stops fit together in a route or trip. It allows data users to visualize routes and trips when mapping the GTFS feed. As a reminder regarding GTFS submissions, this update is for agencies that operate one or more fixed route modes. This field is not required for the current 2025 report year for rural reporters. The next change affects all reporters. Beginning this report year, the stations and maintenance facilities, also called the A10, will no longer appear in the annual report as its own form. Stations and facilities are now consolidated in the Transit Asset Management Facilities Inventory form, also known as the A15. The purpose of consolidating these forms is to simplify the process for reporting transit facilities in the NTD report. Along with the consolidation of the A10 into the A15, another change to the A15 is that agencies must report all maintenance facilities, regardless of capital responsibility. In previous report years, agencies reported maintenance facilities only if the agency had both capital responsibility and the transit use was greater than incidental. In report year 2025, agencies will report maintenance facilities regardless of capital responsibility, but the incidental use criteria is still applicable. As a note, incidental use is when 50% or less of the facility's physical space is dedicated to the provision of public transit. The A15 form for rural reporters will include new fields for reporting passenger stations on the A15 form. As a reminder for reporting passenger stations to the NTD, passenger stations do not include bus stops or simple shelters. Reportable passenger stations must have a significant enclosed structure, or if partially enclosed, a minimum roof square footage of at least 150 feet. Additional information and criteria about passenger stations can be found in the 2025 Policy Manual for Reduced Reporters. This manual can be found in the NTD homepage by selecting Reference Materials, then Manuals, and lastly, Policy Manuals. We will cover the new reporting fields for passenger stations later in this presentation. The A10 Stations and Maintenance Facilities form has been updated to the A15 form for maintenance facility types. The A15 form will now include new required fields for passenger station types. All other facility types, such as admin, fuel, and washing facilities, are unchanged for report year 2025. Agencies must now indicate both the primary mode and type of service for each facility entry in the A15. Existing facilities will need to be updated with the type of service. More information on the new A15 requirements will be discussed later in the presentation. The B10 has an update to indicate whether an agency is a voluntary reporter or not. If you receive Chapter 53 funds or have continuing grant requirements, select No to indicate you are not a voluntary reporter. If you do not receive Chapter 53 funds, select Yes to indicate you are a voluntary reporter. These are additional changes that affect other NTD reporter types, but do not affect or apply to state DOT or subrecipient reporting. However, you can review the updates we discussed and that are on the slide by reviewing the Federal Register notice in response to comments. Please contact your analyst if you would like assistance with locating the Federal Register notices online. An important note is that GTFS web links are required to be up to date with the latest fixed route mode updates. In report year 2025, state DOTs must certify during submission that their subrecipients' web links are up to date. Changes in mode, agency, and route changes during report year 2025 must be reflected in the GTFS web links. The National Rural Transit Assistance Program, or RTAP, helps build, update, and maintain GTFS feeds. You can use their GTFS Builder or Builder support links for assistance, or attend their free live GTFS supports on Thursdays between 1 and 1:30 p.m. Eastern. That concludes the report year 2025 clarifications and updates. Next, we will move on to a review of NTD reporting fundamentals. The service data reported to the NTD must be public transit. That means open to the general public, with exceptions for segments as defined as age, disability, or low income. The service must also be a shared ride, as there must be an attempt to share the vehicle with other passengers. As mentioned here, neither the rider nor driver may deny use of empty seats to another rider. After determining if you can report the data, the mode level comes next. The two most common modes for rural reporters are bus, or MB, and demand response, or DR. Bus service is defined as a vehicle powered by a motor and containing fuel within. It can include services that have route deviation, point deviation, or deviated fixed route. Demand response service is defined as a service scheduled in response to calls from passengers, such as dial a ride. These modes will be updated on the Profiles P20 form. The next topic we'll cover are types of service. Currently in the NTD, there are two main types of service: directly operated, or DO, and purchase transportation, or PT. Directly operated is when the service is operated by the agency and uses the agency's employees. Purchase transportation is when the vehicles are operated by the seller's employees and the service is branded as the buyer's, and the buyer is paying the full cost of the service. Within the purchase transportation category, there are three types. TX is for services operated by a taxi provider. TN is for services operated by a transportation network company, or TNC. If the service is operated by a contractor that is neither a taxi provider nor a TNC, the type of service should remain PT for purchase transportation. After the mode and type of service are determined, the next question is, what data should you be collecting for these services? Here are some of the key data points, as well as abbreviations, that are used throughout this presentation and on the report. These data points are collected on a per mode and type of service basis. The one exception is for sponsored unlinked passenger trips, which are only collected by the demand response mode types. Again, these are common abbreviations, and we will be referring to them throughout the presentation. We will first cover vehicle revenue miles, or VRM, as well as vehicle revenue hours, or VRH. Revenue service is when vehicles are transporting passengers or are able to transport passengers. This includes layover and recovery time. Revenue service does not include deadhead, driver training, school bus or charter services, and vehicle maintenance. The main point is that you need to have the expectation of carrying passengers. But what is deadhead, and how come it's not reported? Deadhead is when there is no expectation of carrying passengers. This includes leaving or returning to the garage or yard facility or changing routes. There are detailed tables found within the NTD policy manual which provide further examples of what is and is not considered revenue service. We will review these tables in a few slides. Some transportation services, such as meal delivery services or other non-passenger services, are not reportable to the NTD as they do not meet FTA's definition of public transportation. Please omit the operating expenses and service data for these services from your NTD report. If 5311 funding is used for these projects, please report the funds that were spent in the funding line, but omit them from the operating expenses by mode and type of service. Here is a table for the demand response mode of what is and is not considered revenue service. Please note that the time in miles from when the vehicle is dispatched from the garage to when a passenger is picked up is not considered revenue service until they reach the pickup point. On the other end of that example, the time in miles from the last drop-off back to the dispatching point is also not considered revenue service. Following up on the previous slide, this is a rundown on what is and is not considered revenue service for the bus mode. Again, from the garage to the first stop of the route is not considered revenue service, and from the last drop-off point back to the garage is also not revenue service. Both of these tables are found in the policy manual and may be helpful to review if you have questions as to what to report for revenue service. Unlinked passenger trips, or UPT, should represent the number of passenger boardings during their reporting period. Passengers are counted each time they board the vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they use from their origin to their destination. When reporting unlinked passenger trips, please include all passengers. These passengers are usually classified as regular or sponsored. When reporting UPT on the RR20 form, this should be the total number of passenger trips by adding regular and sponsored trips together. For demand response, you will report sponsored trips as a subset of the total, as I'll go over in a moment. Sponsored trips are trips that are paid for in part or in full by a third party. These may be part of a coordinated human services transportation plan. Common sponsors are the VA, Medicaid, and assisted living centers. As mentioned on the last slide, sponsored UPT should be reported as a subset of the total unlinked passenger trips for all demand response modes. Vehicles operated in annual maximum service, or VOMS, are the number of revenue vehicles an agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. VOMS are counted during the peak season of the year on the busiest day. This count should include any volunteer vehicles that were used in maximum service. This shouldn't be the number of active vehicles your agency has in service, but rather how many vehicles are used at once during peak service. Again, we're looking for a snapshot of one point during the day, not the entire fleet of vehicles used over the course of a day. Now that we're done with the service data definitions, we will talk about financial requirements. NTD reporting requirements for financial data follow generally accepted accounting principles and accrual accounting. In accrual accounting, the revenue is recorded when earned, regardless of when payment is received, and the expenses are recorded when the liability occurs, regardless of when the payment is made. Please see the examples here and in the policy manual for more detail. Now that you know what to report, you will want to make sure to report the amount that your agency expended during the fiscal year, not the amount it was awarded. Here on the slide is an example. If your agency was awarded $275,000, but you only spent $178,000, you would report the $178,000 instead of the $275,000 that was awarded. Next, we will review types of expenses. First up is operating expenses. Operating expenses are the day-to-day expenses that a transit agency incurs. These may be for operating and maintaining vehicles, maintaining other equipment, planning costs, admin costs, as well as other examples seen here. Capital expenses are those related to the purchase of equipment. Equipment means an article of non-expendable personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year. The equipment will have an acquisition cost, which equals the lesser of the capitalization level established by the government unit for financial statement purposes, or $10,000 as determined by FTA. This figure was $5,000 in previous report years. Again, you may have a lower limit than the established limit, and that is perfectly acceptable. Lastly, we will cover capital expenses spent on operations. This is when the capital funding is spent on activities that are normally considered operating, such as preventative maintenance and the purchase of tires. Please make sure to break this out of your other operating funding line items, as this has a different match percentage. There is a separate field for this on the RR20 form for certain funding lines, such as 5311 or 5310. The next financial item I'd like to cover is what to do when your agency reports multiple modes and you need to allocate expenses for shared costs. If your agency has more than 2 modes, the operating costs will be broken out between the modes based on the direct and shared expenses. Once the direct expenses for each mode are identified and broken out, the remaining shared expenses may be calculated between the modes based on a cost allocation method. Please note that this is only acceptable for shared expenses. There should be some expenses that are direct to each mode, such as fuel, wages, or marketing materials. Switching gears into reporting assets. Here is a quick overview of the TAM rule. Those that receive Chapter 53 funds and either own, operate, or manage capital assets used in provision of public transportation services are required to report data for their assets. For recipients of 5310B 1D, if they do not provide public transit services, they are not required to report under the TAM rule. With regards to how the data is reported, for those in the sponsored state DOT plan, the state will report assets associated with the plan on your A90 for all subrecipients. If your subrecipients have their own TAM plan, you will report all assets and the targets as well as a narrative report on each agency's A90 form. States may have Tier 2 participants as part of their TAM plan, and these will mostly consist of 5311, 5310, and small urban providers. States are required to sponsor a plan. However, agencies may opt out of that plan. If agencies opt out of the plan, they must submit the target and narrative report data themselves. We will mention capital responsibility multiple times throughout this presentation with regards to TAM plans. Please see the list here to determine whether or not an agency has direct capital responsibility for an asset. As a note for the third bullet point, an infrastructure asset itemized as a capital line item in the budget does not necessarily mean an agency has direct capital responsibility. An agency must also have management or oversight responsibilities for the line item project. In addition, performing minimal preventative maintenance work does not necessarily indicate direct capital responsibility. Lastly, I want to go over the A90 with regards to the narrative report. You will upload your narrative report through the A90 interface as seen here. If you need access to a prior year's narrative report, please contact your analyst for assistance. Please note that it should be a narrative report of your targets year over year and should not be your TAM plan. We've completed a high-level overview of the definitions and acronyms of NTD reporting. Next, we will review the NTD interface and account management. The NTD homepage is found at www.transit.dot.gov/NTD. This is where data products, policy manuals, and a clickable link to the reporting system are housed. You will click on the blue link that reads, "If you are a non-FTA user, click this link to log in." From there, it will prompt you to log into login.gov. Please make sure to set this up with the same email address you use for NTD reporting. You should always select this link when you first land on this login page. You should not enter your login credentials on this initial page or select the forgot password link. These links are outdated and will be discontinued. In addition to an email and password, login.gov will require the use of at least one secondary authentication method, such as a code delivered through a text message or phone call. Once set up, whichever method was chosen will be used when logging into the NTD reporting system. After logging in, all users land on this homepage. The Appian platform houses NTD, trams, and faces. Here, you will select NTD in order to access your report. If you would like to automatically go into the NTD site every time you log in, you can click on the star at the top right hand of the NTD box, and this will save your preference. The NTD homepage allows you to directly access their NTD report from the front page by selecting either the folder icon or the pencil icon. Next is the Tasks tab. This section will house any tasks that are assigned to you. Incomplete report submissions will appear in your task list. If you begin to submit your report but exit the process midway through, you can finish the submission process by checking your task list. To access your report packages, you will want to ensure you are on the home page. From here, you will select the Annual tab and it will populate any open NTD reports for your agency. You can access the forms one of two ways. You can either click on the NTD ID with the folder icon on the left, which will direct you to the report package summary page. This route will also allow you to access the related actions for the package. If you would like only to edit the forms, you can click on the pencil icon on the far right of the page and the system will take you directly to the clickable list of forms to edit. Another way to review your subrecipients is by going to your state package and then clicking on subrecipient packages. To access the reporter profiles, you will still want to ensure that you are on the home page or tab. You will select Profile and your agency profile will load. The profile is where you will edit your mode, agency basic information, as well as view other users from your agency. To view the individual forms, you will click on the pencil icon on the right side of the page, which will allow you to access the P10, P20, and other profile forms. To access other profile options, click on the NTD ID folder icon on the left. Please note that you may see agencies that you no longer report on behalf of. This is stored so that you can go back to review past submissions as needed. Once you click on the NTD ID folder icon on the left, you will see the profile summary page. Here, you can go through related actions to edit the P forms. As a reminder, you can access the P50 form for subrecipients with fixed route modes through this menu. The P50 GTFS submission form will appear on the subrecipient profiles if the P20 lists an active fixed route mode. This is where you can add, modify, or remove GTFS web links. A new requirement for report year 2025 is the agency ID. Agencies report the agency ID that appears in the agency's GTFS files. In addition to viewing the forms, under the Related Actions tab of the profile, you will be able to print previous year's report packages in full rather than form by form. If you select the Print button to download the selected annual report package, you will be taken to a new page where you will see the Refresh button. Please wait a few minutes and click on the Refresh button. When the page reloads after you select Refresh, the downloadable link will appear under your reporter name. If you would like additional guidance for navigating the online reporting system as a state DOT user, we encourage you to review the recording for their webinar, NTD Reporting Best Practices for State DOTs and TAM Group Plan Sponsors. You can find this presentation on the NTD program website on the Presentation and Webinars page. Self-reporting subrecipients have the ability to enter and edit data for their forms. This privilege is granted by state DOTs and is completely optional and at the state's discretion. While self-reporting subrecipients can edit and save forms, the state DOT is still the one who will submit the report. Subrecipients should contact the state DOT for any questions or technical assistance needed while completing their report. All correspondence with the NTD analyst should go through the state DOT contact. If a subrecipient asks you a question and you are unsure of how to answer it, please follow up with your analyst on behalf of the subrecipient. Additionally, state DOTs that grant self-reporting privileges must review the subrecipient's data and validation responses prior to submitting each report. Not only does this create a smoother validation process, but also is because the state is responsible for the content of the subrecipient's report. Next, we'll start going over the report year kickoff. The report year kickoff will appear as a task in the list of NTD contacts, CEO delegates, and CEOs. You will need to click on the task and select the report year kickoff. This task completes the kickoff on behalf of all subrecipients, including self-reporting subs. Once you select the report year kickoff, you will hit accept at the top right of the screen. Once one user accepts the kickoff task, it will be removed from all other applicable user types tasks list unless it is reassigned. You will next verify the users on the P30. If any users need to be updated, you can complete the kickoff, then as a user manager, make those updates. If you need additional user managers added, please contact your analyst. After reviewing the users, you will review your subrecipients. The list from the prior year will pre-populate in a grid, as seen here. During this step, you can also add new subrecipients from a list of existing subrecipients. If you need to add a new subrecipient, you can do so at the bottom of the page. However, please do not add a subrecipient unless you have the required information ready. Do not toggle off of this page. If you need to add new subrecipients, you can finish the kickoff, then go to the States Related Actions page to add or remove subrecipients after the kickoff is complete. After the subrecipients have been confirmed, the next page you will be able to update the subrecipient type if needed. The prior year subrecipient type will pre-populate. Then you will check off the participants in your TAM plan. Please note that RGPT subrecipients will automatically be marked as a part of your state TAM plan, and you'll need to uncheck the box so that their A90 forms automatically populate. You should also review the subrecipient emergency contacts during the report year kickoff. If changes are needed, you can edit the emergency contacts in the P10 after the kickoff is complete. Next, you will be able to select which agencies are self-reporting, meaning that you'll have the individual subrecipients go in and update the data and answer any validation issues. Then you will be able to click on Submit. Once you click Submit, you'll see this box populate stating that the kickoff task has been completed and that it may take a couple of minutes to populate your forms. They take longer to populate based on how large your agency is. You'll click on OK, then go back to your home page. If you have any issues with the kickoff or subrecipients on your list, please contact your analyst. Once the kickoff is completed, it's time to enter data on forms. I'm going to pass it over to Courtney to go over completing the annual report, submission, and validation.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Courtney Springer, and in this section, we will cover how to complete the annual NTD report for report year 2025. Here's the definition of the Rural General Public Transit, or RGPT, subrecipient type, as well as a list of their annual report forms. RGPT subrecipients are agencies that provide rural service and receive or benefit from 5311 funding, excluding urban agencies who also receive 5307 funding, and also excluding tribes. We will cover each of these report forms in more detail in the upcoming sections. Here's the definition of the asset-only subrecipient type and their list of report forms. So asset-only subrecipients are agencies that receive or benefit from FTA Chapter 53 funding other than 5307 or 5311 funds, and they own, operate, or manage capital assets that are used to provide public transportation services. Here's a definition of intercity bus subrecipients and their report forms. These subrecipient types only complete the B10 form and an abbreviated RR20 form, where they report their Section 5311 funding, as well as the vehicle revenue miles and unlinked passenger trips that correspond to their 5311 funded service. Urban or tribal subrecipients report directly to the NTD and submit their own annual report packages. However, if they receive 5311 funds from the state must complete a 5311 summary report for this agency in the state's report package. In these reports, the state completes the B10 form and also an abbreviated RR20 form to report the Section 5311 funding awarded during the fiscal year. To begin reporting, navigate to the NTD homepage, and with the Annual tab selected, open either the state's report package or an individual subrecipient report package. From the state's report package summary view, select the Annual Forms button in the top right-hand corner to open the state DOT's report forms, which are the A90 or RU30 forms. You may also select the Subrecipient Reports tab to open the subrecipient grid. The subrecipient grid shows all subrecipient report packages contained within the state DOT report. You can select a subrecipient's name to open their individual report package. You can also sort this table by a few different criteria, including open validation issues. So this can help you easily review which subrecipient reports have outstanding issues that would prevent submission of the report. You can also select the Related Actions tab from the state's report summary page. This menu provides an option to open your report forms. Select Annual Forms to open the editable list of forms. Once the list of forms is open, you can select the hyperlinked form name to begin reporting. We'll start by reviewing the report forms for a rural general public transit subrecipient, and then later we'll cover the state-specific forms towards the end of this presentation. The first subrecipient form we will review is the Basic Information or Identification B10 form. If you completed an annual NTD report for this subrecipient last year, the organization type you selected will carry over into this year's form. So review this selection to ensure it is correct. You should also review the fiscal year end date that pre-populates in this field. This date corresponds to the 12-month period for this agency's 2025 report data. This date may differ from the state DOT's fiscal year end. As a reminder, the voluntary reporter tag will appear in this form beginning in report year 2025. Select yes if this agency does not have any reporting obligations to the NTD, including continuing grant requirements. Select no if this agency is required to report to the NTD, such as agencies who receive 5311 funding or other Chapter 53 funds. The auxiliary sections in the B10 form are typically rare for rural agencies, so please do not complete this section without discussing it first with your analyst. When you have completed the B10 form, select Save and Validate. Next, we will discuss the Geographic Area Coverage B15 form. This form will only appear in a subrecipient's report if they operate a demand response or DR mode. If you completed the B15 form for a given subrecipient last year, your responses will pre-populate in this year's report. You should review those responses to ensure they are accurate and up to date. We will review each of the 10 questions presented in this report form. Some of the questions will be dynamic based on your selections to previous questions. Question 1 asks if the subrecipient serves residents in another state besides your state, Select yes or no. Question 2 allows you to select the counties that the agency serves, either in whole or in part. You should start by selecting Add, after which you can choose your state and report the counties. Question 3 allows you to select the census places that are served within those counties. You can download the counties and census places reference file directly from the reporting system. The report is an Excel file that populates based on the counties you entered in question 2 and will contain all of the corresponding census places so that you can complete question 3. Once you have reported the census places, you can then select the service level by indicating whether the census places are wholly served or partially served. Question 4 asks if any portion of this service is intended to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act complementary paratransit requirements for a fixed route mode. Select yes if this demand response mode provides the ADA paratransit for a specific fixed route service. Select no if this demand response service does not provide the ADA paratransit for any fixed route service. If you select yes, question 5 asks if the service area is limited to this particular agency's NTD ID. If it is, select yes. If this agency's ADA service serves other NTD reporters, select no. If you select no, you should search for and select all other NTD IDs that the ADA service covers. Question 6 asks if you have different passenger eligibility requirements or different terms and conditions of service. Select yes or no. Question 7 asks which days per week you operate. Select the checkboxes for each applicable day, then select Create Days of the Week on the right-hand side of this page, which will populate question 8. For question 8, you will report the service begin and end time for each day. You will also answer 3 eligibility questions about these services. In the next slide, we will provide reporting guidance for the 3 categories shown in the bottom right-hand corner of this screenshot here for question 8. So that's complementary paratransit eligible, age or disability or low income, and general population. The B15 form should include all of your agency's demand response services. So for example, if you operate both paratransit and dial-a-ride services, you should include both services on the form. Select yes for complementary paratransit eligible if you operate a service that is intended to meet the ADA complementary paratransit requirement for a fixed route service and which is restricted to persons your agency has found eligible for paratransit service. So this is not the same as ADA eligible or ADA compliant. It must be ADA restricted. Select yes for age or disability or low income if you operate a service that is restricted to elderly, disabled, or low income riders, but is not ADA paratransit. Again, you should not select yes if your services are simply open to these groups, or if they pay a reduced fare, or if they perhaps receive priority trip scheduling. You should only select yes if the service is restricted to passengers in any of these groups. Finally, select yes for general population if you operate a service that has no eligibility restrictions. Question 9 asks for the minimum advanced reservation time for this service. Enter the numeric minimum, then select either hours or days. If passengers must reserve their trips by a certain time the day prior to the trip, you should report 1 day in this field. Finally, question 10 asks for the fare charged for this service. As a quick note, you should not include donations in this field. And if trip rates vary, you should report the most commonly charged baseline one-way fare. We encourage you to contact your validation analyst if you have any questions about this report form. Next, we will discuss the Transit Asset Management Facilities Inventory A15 form. The A15 form collects information on facilities that the subrecipient uses to supply public transit service. On this form, you should report all passenger and parking facilities that the agency uses in their public transit service, regardless of who has capital responsibility for those facilities. For example, if they use a bus transfer center in their fixed route service, you should report that facility on the A15 form, even if the subrecipient does not have capital responsibility for that facility. You should also report all maintenance facilities that the agency uses to support their revenue service, also regardless of capital responsibility. However, you should only report maintenance facilities if the transit use for that facility is greater than incidental. Finally, you should report administrative facilities for which the transit agency has capital responsibility and if the transit use is greater than incidental. As Matt mentioned earlier in this presentation, the A10 fields for passenger stations and maintenance facilities have been migrated into the A15 form starting in report year 2025. This means that certain facility type selections will present unique reporting fields on the A15 form. This table shows all of the facility type options in NTD reporting and how they will appear on the form. So if you report a passenger station facility type that falls under the first column in this table, the A15 form will show the updated fields for reporting passenger stations. If you report a maintenance facility type that falls under the second column in the table, the A15 form will show the updated fields for reporting maintenance facilities. Finally, if you report a facility type that falls under this third column, such as an administrative facility, the A15 form will not show any updated reporting fields. Existing facility information will pre-populate from report year 2024. So you can report new facilities for report year 2025 if needed, or update your existing facilities from last year. As a quick note, a new facility type for vehicle storage facilities or bus barns will be rolled out in the A15 form for report year 2025. Currently, agencies report storage-only facilities under the facility type general purpose maintenance facility / depot. So if you are currently reporting a bus barn under this facility type, please update the facility this year to the new storage-only option. To add a new facility, select the Add New button. When the new facility sections appear, select Add Facility to continue. This will populate the beginning fields for this new facility. Note that you can select Add Facility more than once on this page if you would like to create multiple facility entries. The reporting sections on this form are Update Facility Information and Update Address. Note that the fields in the facility information section will be dynamic based on the facility selection type. Report the new facility's name and primary mode, as well as any secondary and private modes if they are applicable. Next, select the facility type from a drop-down menu. If you select a passenger station facility type, the reporting fields for this facility type will appear as a subsection in the next row. We will review these fields in the next slide. Returning to the standard facility information fields, you should then report the year the facility was built or reconstructed as new, the square footage of the facility, and the transit agency capital responsibility. You may also enter any applicable notes in this section. This field is optional. So the passenger station reporting requirements are as follows. First, you should indicate whether the facility is accessible or inaccessible in accordance with the Americans with Disabilities Act or ADA. Select yes or no for the field ADA accessible. Next, report the number of elevators and escalators within the station. Please note that this excludes moving sidewalks and also excludes any escalators or elevators that are used only for freight or transit staff or as a backup if the primary escalators and elevators are out of order. So returning back to the facility information section where you select the facility type, if you select a maintenance facility as the facility type, the next section will populate the corresponding required fields. These fields should look familiar if you completed the A10 form last year, as these fields have simply been migrated into the A15 form. First, you should select the maintenance facility type. There are 3 reporting options for general maintenance facility, depending on the facility's total vehicle capacity. Next, select the right of use for the facility, with the options being either owned or leased. Next, you will select who owns or leases the facility, with the options being either a public agency or service provider. Finally, you will select who the facility is leased from, with the options being either a public agency or private entity. So please note that these selections are dynamic based on the earlier selections in this form and the mode and type of service that you attribute to this facility. For example, if you only assign modes with a directly operated type of service to this facility and you select owned as the right of use, the owned or leased by category will be hard-coded to public agency as shown on the screenshot. On the other hand, if you assign modes with a purchase transportation type of service to this facility and you select owned, the owned or leased by category will be editable so that you can choose either public agency or service provider. And as one more example, if you select owned as the right of use, the leased from options will not populate since they don't apply. We will not cover every combination of options during this presentation, but if you have any questions about this section, please contact your analyst. So returning one more time to the facility information fields where you select the vehicle type, if you select a facility type that is neither a passenger station nor a maintenance facility, the only subsequent fields that will appear are the condition assessment fields, which is consistent with last year's reporting. So there are no additional reporting fields for facilities such as vehicle washing facilities, which is the example provided in the screenshot. For all 3 facility reporting options, being passenger stations, maintenance facilities, or all other facility types, for all 3, you are required to report the condition assessment and estimated date of the condition assessment if you report capital responsibility for that facility. Again, this is the same reporting requirement as previous years. The condition assessment is a 1 to 5 rating based on FTA's term scale and must be completed once every 4 years at minimum. You must also report the estimated date of the condition assessment, which must be prior to the fiscal year end date for the current reporting period. For example, if your 2025 NTD report is based on the fiscal year period ending June 30th, you may not enter a date beyond June 30th, 2025. If you reported any transit facilities to the NTD in report year 2024, you will need to update the facility to reflect the type of service under the primary mode dropdown. Previously, this field only collected the primary mode without a corresponding type of service. In report year 2025, you should open those facility entries and revise the dropdown so that your facilities are accurate moving forward. Here's a quick view of the new reporting fields for existing facilities. So the screenshots we reviewed in the previous slides show what the form would look like when you're adding a new facility to the form. This screenshot shows what the form will look like for updating existing facilities that you reported last year. In this example, the agency reported a maintenance facility type in 2024, so that facility entry has the migrated A10 fields for 2025. If any of the updated A15 fields are incomplete, the system will alert you by providing this error banner at the top of the form. You must update all facilities to submit your annual report for 2025. If your agency does not have any reportable transit facilities, select the No Data to Report checkbox at the bottom of the form. For example, let's say a county-owned maintenance facility services 100 total vehicles across multiple departments, including 25 public transit vehicles. In this case, the transit use for this facility is considered incidental because the 25 transit vehicles make up less than 50% of the 100 total vehicles serviced at this facility. So you would not report this maintenance facility on the NTD report. Again, we encourage you to reach out to your validation analyst if you have any questions about the updated A15 form this year. Next, we will review the Revenue Vehicle Inventory A30 form. If you completed this form last year, the data from Report Year 2024 will pre-populate, which again means you will only need to add new fleets or edit existing fleets as needed. You can enter new fleets by selecting the Add New Fleet button, or you can edit an existing fleet by selecting the RVI ID link for that fleet towards the left of the table. When adding a new fleet, the first section you will see is basic information. You should complete all required fields for this fleet. Some examples of the required fields include vehicle type, total vehicles, ownership type, and funding type. The next section is vehicle information. Again, complete all required fields in this section. The form will automatically calculate the useful life years remaining for a given fleet based on what you report for the year manufactured and the useful life benchmark. As a quick reporting reminder, please remember to mark fleets as retired in the reporting system if the vehicles have been sold or disposed of, rather than deleting the fleets. To retire a fleet, update the number of active vehicles to 0. When you report 0 active vehicles, the system will provide the question, "Is this fleet retired?" which you should select as yes. Fleets should typically only be deleted if they were added to the form in error, or if you are removing a duplicate fleet after using the Add Existing Fleet function. The next form we will cover is the Service Vehicle Inventory A35 form. Agencies must report service vehicle fleets for which they have capital responsibility. Service vehicles include cars used for administrative staff, tow trucks, or service trucks. Because service vehicles must be roadworthy, agencies should not report small forklifts or golf carts or any type of construction equipment that is not roadworthy. To create a fleet, select Add New. Report the service fleet information for this vehicle fleet. Select the vehicle type from a drop-down menu, which consists of 3 options: automobiles, trucks and other rubber-tired vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. Automobiles are passenger cars up to and including station wagons in size. If you have a service vehicle that is a minivan or anything larger, you should report them as trucks and other rubber tire vehicles. Steel wheel vehicles are typically reported by larger urban agencies with rail modes, so please disregard this option. Estimated cost is the most recent estimate of the full cost to replace the fleet. If you do not have a recent estimate, you may report the original cost of the fleet or its insured value. You must also report the year that corresponds to the dollar value you report. Save and validate the A35 form once you are finished. Again, if the agency does not have any reportable service vehicles, select the No Data to Report checkbox prior to saving the form. Please ensure that you do not report revenue vehicles on the A35 form. This form should only include service vehicles. If you have a vehicle that is used for both purposes, you should report it on the A30 form only. The Rural General Public Transit Reduced Reporting RR20 form contains an agency's financial, service, and resource data. When you open the RR20 form, the first two sections are total funds expended and funds expended by mode. The funds expended section allows you to manually input your operating and capital expenses for each mode that you operate. In this example, this agency operates two modes: demand response directly operated, or DRDO, and motor bus directly operated, or MBDO. The agency reported an annual total of $325,000 in operating expenses and $250,000 in capital expenses, and reported the corresponding annual totals for each mode in their respective fields. Of course, please note that these totals are rounded for example purposes only. You should report all funds that your agency expended towards public transit service. So this means you should not limit your operating expense reporting to federal grant programs. In the subsequent sections of the RR20 form, you will identify the various sources of funds that supported this transit system. We will cover the different funding source categories in the next few slides. So as you begin to report the funding sources, the system will automatically calculate a running total in the total funds expended section. In this example, the agency has reported all of its funding sources, which totaled $325,000 in operations and $250,000 in capital. The sum of your funding sources should typically match what you entered in the funds expended section as shown in this screenshot. So the operating expenses match as shown by the totals shown in red, and the capital expenses match as shown by the totals in green. Agencies that operate more than one mode are required to capture and report actual expenses by mode and type of service. If an agency reports more than one mode, you should determine which expenses are direct expenses and can be easily traced to a specific mode. Direct costs may include driver wages or vehicle repairs for specific modes. For the remaining joint or shared expenses, which are costs that are incurred for the benefit of more than one mode and cannot be traced, you may allocate those remaining costs. An example of shared costs may be a transit manager's salary that supports both modes. You may allocate shared costs by using an allocation factor, such as vehicle revenue miles, unlinked passenger trips, vehicle revenue hours, or number of employees per mode. The next section of the RR20, which begins the different funding source categories, is fare revenues. Fare revenues include all income received and expended directly from passengers, which include donations made on board a transit vehicle. This section is broken down between passenger paid fares and organization paid fares. It's also broken down by mode and type of service if your agency reports two or more modes or types of service. Passenger paid fares reflect the amount of the fare that the passengers pay on their own behalf. So this category includes full adult fares, senior citizen fares, student fares, child fares, and fares for individuals with disabilities. This section also includes donations that are made on board a vehicle in lieu of paying a fare. Organization paid fares are those that an organization pays for or pays through a third party rather than the passenger. One common example of an organization paid fare is a university paying a transit agency to allow its students to ride fare free. You should report funds expended from Medicaid for non-emergency medical transportation, or NEMT, as an organization paid fare. The next funding source in the form is other directly generated funds, which are funds that an agency earns from other transit-related services. Some common examples of other directly generated funds are advertising revenues, concession revenues, fundraisers, park and ride revenues, interest on investments, contract revenue for any non-full cost contracts, donations, and insurance recoveries. And when we say donations for this field, this refers to lump sum donations that are issued directly to the transit agency. This does not refer to donations made by passengers upon boarding a transit vehicle. If you report funds to this field, a required text description box will appear. The next funding source category is revenues accrued through a purchased transportation or PT agreement. You should only report funds to this section if a subrecipient receives revenues from another agency who pays the full cost of a transit service the subrecipient provides. This agreement must meet the NTD definition of purchased transportation. It is not common for rural agencies to report funds to this field, so please discuss this with your analyst before reporting new funds to this field. The next funding source category is non-federal funds. Report the funds the agency expended from local, state, and other non-federal sources. Local sources include tax levies, general funds, and finances from local entities. State sources include state programs that support public transit, but do not include the Chapter 53 funds that your state DOT passes through to subrecipients, since Chapter 53 funds are federal in origin. If you report other funds similar to other directly generated funds, a text description box will appear, so ensure that you enter a description of those funds. In the federal funds section, select all applicable federal funding sources from this list of programs. Once you select a category, the corresponding data entry fields will populate to the right. If you report funds to any other category, such as other federal funds or other FTA funds, you must provide a text description to specify that funding program. Examples of other FTA funds include those not already listed in the RR20 form, such as Section 5308 FTA Clean Fuels Program. Examples of other federal funds include funds from a non-FTA or non-DOT federal grant not listed in the form, such as Housing and Urban Development or Department of Health and Human Services funds. Other US DOT funds include funds that come from the Department of Transportation that are not FTA funds, such as funds from the Federal Highway Administration. After you complete the financial data section, complete the other resources section if it's applicable to this agency. Report the number of volunteer drivers, which is based on the number of drivers the agency has available. Report the number of personal vehicles in service, which is based on the number of vehicles routinely used by the agency. Do not report volunteers' personal vehicles on the A30 revenue vehicle inventory form. You should only report them in this section. If this section does not apply to this agency, enter zeros into these data entry fields. The next section in the form is annual service data. When reporting miles and hours, you should only include those miles and hours in which transit vehicles are operating in revenue service, which is when the vehicles are transporting passengers or have the capacity to transport passengers. Unlinked passenger trips should reflect each instance in which a passenger boards a vehicle and should include personal care attendants who ride fare-free. The total unlinked passenger trips should represent all ridership for the year, including regular and sponsored trips. In other words, even though agencies report sponsored UPT in a separate field for certain modes, you should not deduct the sponsored UPT from the total UPT. Next, we will discuss the Safety and Security SNS 60 form. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act requires the NTD to collect data related to assaults on transit workers. Agencies who report to the NTD must report all assaults on transit workers, even if the assault does not result in an injury. RGPT and reduced asset subrecipients began reporting expanded safety data in the new SNS 60 form, beginning in report year 2023. Here are the two assault categories that agencies report. So physical assaults involve physical contact with a transit worker and can include contact with the attacker's body, a weapon, a projectile, or other item. Non-physical assaults involve no physical contact and may include threats, intimidation, or interfering with the worker's duties. This is the first section in the SNS 60 form is physical assaults on transit workers. Report a count of assaults based on 4 different location options, which are shown in the column headers. So this is physical assaults in transit vehicle, physical assaults in revenue facility, physical assaults in non-revenue facility, and physical assaults in other location. You should also report assaults based on whether they met a major reporting threshold, such as an injury or fatality. You can report the corresponding injuries or fatalities in the rows below based on whether the affected person was an operator, an other transit worker, or an other individual. If the physical assault did not result in an injury or fatality and did not meet an other major reporting threshold, you can report those under non-major events. Both the major events and non-major events fields require input in this form. So if you do not have any events to report in these categories, enter zeros into these fields. The next section in the form is non-physical assaults on transit workers. The categories in this table are identical to the categories in the physical assaults table. So again, report a count of non-physical assaults on transit workers based on the 4 location options and whether there were any resulting injuries or fatalities by person type. Similar to the previous slide, the major and non-major event fields in the top left corner are required, so you should enter zeros in these fields if they do not apply for the current reporting period. The additional details field will open for editing if you report any physical or non-physical assaults in the previous 2 tables. This field allows you to provide a written description of any reported assaults, such as the time of day the assault took place, involvement of weapons, law enforcement response to assaults, or whether the transit vehicle was equipped with anti-assault infrastructure. You should not provide descriptions for safety events that are not related to assaults in this field. The third and final section of the SNS 60 form is all other reportable safety and security data. The first 3 rows refer to the following collision types: collisions with pedestrians, collisions with vehicles, and collisions with other, which can include things like an animal, manhole, or shopping cart. Please note that you should only report safety events to these categories if they meet a major event reporting threshold, which are outlined in the NTD policy manual. If you have any reportable collisions that meet this criteria, you should report an annual count under the major events column. You should then report any corresponding fatalities or injuries resulting from the collision if they are applicable. Next, report a count of other major events, which are major safety events excluding collisions that meet a major event reporting threshold. Some examples of other major event types include fires, security events, hazardous material spills, or acts of God. Report a count of other major events in this section, as well as any resulting injuries or fatalities if applicable. Again, the reporting thresholds for major events are detailed in the NTD policy manual for reduced reporters. We encourage you to review the thresholds or reach out to your analyst if you have any questions about this section. The last field in this section is total reportable injuries from non-major events. These are events that are not included in the major event categories listed in the NTD policy manual. Non-major event types include slips, trips, falls, smoke events, fumes, and electric shock. If any of these events result in a fatality, evacuation, or property damage exceeding $25,000, you should report them as major events. You should also report these as major events if they result in 2 or more injured persons. If these events do not meet the fatality, evacuation, or property damage thresholds and only result in 1 injury, you should report them under total reportable injuries from non-major events. So for example, if a smoke event results in 1 injury, that would be reported in the field total reportable injuries from non-major events. If the same smoke event resulted in 2 injuries, that would be reported under other major events with 2 corresponding injuries. That was an overview of the report forms that will appear in a subrecipient report package. We will now review the state's report forms, starting with the statewide characteristics RU30 form. The RU30 is a summary form for statewide characteristics and will pre-populate the number of counties statewide. Report the number of counties with 5311 service, which represents the total number of counties in the state that are served, either in whole or in part, by 5311 funded operators. You should include counties that are served by directly reporting Indian tribes. A county is considered to be served if an agency picks up or drops off passengers in that county. Next, report the total 5311 funds that were expended on state administration during the fiscal year. If this sum significantly increases or decreases from the value you reported last year, your analyst may ask about this during validation. Next, we will discuss the Transit Asset Management Performance Measure Targets, or A90 form. Agencies report the portion of their assets which have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark. The A90 form compares the current year targets to the live data that is pulled directly from the current year's asset forms. For this report year, the form will compare the 2025 targets, which were set last year in report year 2024, against the live data in the 2025 report forms. For revenue and service vehicles, the system looks at the reported useful life benchmarks, and for facilities, the system looks at the reported condition assessments. State DOTs report on behalf of their managed and independent participants and completes a single A90 form that represents the whole group. The first section in the A90 form, rolling stock, refers to revenue vehicles on the participants' A30 forms. The performance measure refers to the percent of vehicles that have met or exceeded their useful life benchmarks. To complete this section, report the 2026 performance target. This refers to the percent of vehicles that you expect will have met or exceeded their useful life benchmarks by next year. Select NA for any asset types that do not apply to your group TAM plan. Each asset type must either have a target reported or have the NA checkbox selected. The second section is equipment, which refers to service vehicles reported on the participants' A35 forms. The performance measure and targets work the same way as they do for rolling stock, so you should report the 2026 target, which represents the percentage of service vehicles in each category that you expect will meet or exceed the useful life benchmarks by next year. Again, select NA for any asset types that do not apply. The third section is facility, which refers to the facilities you report on the participants' A15 forms. This section calculates the performance measure based on the percentage of facilities that rate below a 3 on FTA's term scale, which again ranges from 1 to 5. Report your 2026 target or select NA for any asset types that do not apply. You should also upload your group TAM plan's narrative report at the bottom of this form. The narrative report outlines the targets you reported in the A90 form, the progress towards those targets, and any changes within the transit system's operating environments that may impact the targets. This document should include a text narrative and is different from the full TAM plan spreadsheet. Your group TAM plan participants will see a read-only version of the group's A90 form. Once you have completed the reports for all subrecipients, completed the state forms, and addressed all open validation issues, you should submit the annual report package. To begin, open the State DOT report package and open the Related Actions tab, then select Submit Annual Report Package. Please note that only state users with the CEO or CEO delegate role can submit the original submission, which is the first draft, of the annual report. The NTD contact user can submit all subsequent revisions once the report is returned. If the report has any open issues, the system will notify you when you attempt to submit the report. Open issues can include unaddressed validation issues, non-validated report forms, or incomplete required fields. From this list, you can navigate directly to those forms to resolve those issues. If the report does not have any open issues, you can select the Continue button to proceed to the next page. The next step relates to the General Transit Feed Specification web links for your RGPT subrecipients who operate fixed route modes. This page will populate all of the applicable subrecipients and asks you to confirm that all of the GTFS web links are up to date. You must select yes or no for each subrecipient. If you need to update a subrecipient's GTFS web link, please open the individual agency's P50 profile form and make any necessary changes prior to submitting the state's annual report. Select Continue to proceed to the next step. The next submission step is the FFA 20 summary form, which provides basic information about the state DOT report package, including the current report year and report package version. The bottom of the FFA 20 form also provides some statewide aggregate data, such as the total vehicle revenue miles, vehicle revenue hours, unlinked passenger trips, and operating expenses. Once you are ready to submit the report package, select the Submit option at the bottom of the form. That was an overview of the reporting process for state DOT reporters. Next, we will discuss some common reporting challenges agencies may face while completing the annual report. Reporting challenges can take shape in a variety of ways, including understanding the NTD policies, completing data entry correctly, completing all required forms and fields in the report, and addressing validation issues. Analysts will send reports back with open issues if they have follow-up questions regarding the report data. Validation includes, but is not limited to, time series checks against an agency's historical data, logic checks between data items on different forms, and checks for values that fall outside the typical industry range. To resolve validation issues, you can either revise the data if the data requires a correction, or provide a text explanation that addresses the issue to establish accuracy. One common reporting issue relates to allocating operating expenses. As a reminder, agencies who operate 2 or more modes may not allocate their total annual operating expenses. Rather, they must first determine which expenses are direct costs and attribute those costs to the appropriate mode. Agencies may then allocate the remaining shared costs to each mode and type of service afterwards. Agencies should only report service data for when they are operating revenue service. Revenue service does not include deadhead, therefore deadhead should not be included in the data that is reported to the NTD. Deadhead is when transit vehicles are operating closed door and do not carry passengers. This includes leaving or returning to the garage or heading to or from the starting or ending points of revenue service. This can also include changing routes or when the driver does not have the duty to carry passengers. Vehicle revenue miles is an apportionment formula factor for 5311 funds, so this data is validated closely. Agencies should report the vehicles operated in maximum service, or VOMs, based on the number of revenue vehicles the agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. This includes volunteer vehicles that operate during peak service periods. Agencies might report 100% of their active vehicle inventory as their VOMs. This would be correct if your agency operated all of its active vehicles during peak service periods. However, agencies typically retain spare vehicles that do not operate during peak service times. If the VOMs you report on the RR20 form is identical to the number of active vehicles you report on the A30 form, your analyst may ask about this during validation. When agencies report new vehicles, they typically also report the corresponding capital expenses on the RR20 form. One validation issue that comes up is that agencies might report the new vehicles on the A30 form or the capital expenses on the RR20 form, but not both. As a reminder, you should report capital expenses for new vehicles on the RR20 form once the vehicle has been delivered and accepted by the agency. You should also add the vehicles to your inventory once the vehicle has been put into revenue service. These may fall between 2 different fiscal year periods, but they often typically fall within the same year. On the A90 form, agencies must report the next fiscal year's performance targets for all assets for which they have capital replacement responsibility, including their rolling stock, equipment, and facilities. One reporting issue might be that an agency reports this year's target, the current year's target, rather than next year's target. So during report year 2025, you should report the target for 2026. Another issue may be reporting a target that does not seem statistically realistic. So your analyst may ask about any targets that do not appear consistent with the current asset inventory. After you submit the report, there are a couple more steps that must be taken to close out the report for the year. As a quick aside, the slide here says 2023, but it should read 2024. Your validation analyst will review the entire report for accuracy and consistency. They'll compare the data in this year's report to the data submitted in last year's report to look for any significant changes, ensure that all the forms have been completed, and check to see that the data has been reported to the correct fields. If your analyst asks about any data changes from last year to this year, please avoid providing generalized responses such as the data is correct, since these types of responses don't offer a clear explanation for why the data changed. The more information or context you can provide in the reporting process, that can help reduce the number of report turnovers before closeout. Once your analyst has reviewed the report, they will return it so that you can resolve the open validation issues. As the report revision count increases, the revision time period will decrease since the report should have fewer and fewer issues with each submission. Be sure to address any items that were cited in last year's closeout letter. If you failed to correct any issues in last year's closeout letter, that data might be marked as questionable this year. Notes in the closeout letter typically relate to incomplete reports, which could mean either the data didn't conform with the NTD definitions or accounting principles, or it could mean that the agency did not adequately respond to validation issues raised by the analyst. If you respond to a validation issue and notice that your analyst kept the issue open with a follow-up question, please avoid copying your original response and pasting it as your follow-up response. And please also avoid copying and pasting the same response across multiple checks if those checks are asking about different service characteristics. All identified issues must be addressed for the report to be closed out and for the issue to be considered resolved. If any of these issues occur, FTA cites them in the closeout letter. The best way to resolve validation issues is to provide thorough and detailed explanations that give your analyst a clear picture of the agency's service. If you find that last year's data was incorrect, please provide the correct value if you have it, or provide an explanation for why it was incorrect. If you'd like more guidance on how to address NTD validation, we encourage you to review the recording of the webinar titled 2024 NTD Validation Module Training, which you can find in the presentations and webinars page of the NTD program website. And here we are with no time to spare. Here's the contact information for our team, as well as the NTD Help Desk, which is open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. We really hope this session was helpful to you all as you prepare for this report year. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Lori to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Again, I also want to thank everyone for participating this afternoon. Usually if we have time, we moderate some questions at the end, but there's no open questions. So we ask you to use the contacts on the last page of the handouts on the last slide if you have any further questions. You will be receiving an evaluation to view this session. Please fill it out. It just takes a couple of minutes. Really appreciate it. And I guess that's it. Everyone enjoy your Thursday, and I'll see some of you maybe next week for our next webinar. Thanks. Bye-bye.